Prophet of God by Chris Cooper, Chapter 21. Belly of the wreck. Enemy fire was still bouncing off of the features of the interior of the building, and billows of black smoke soared into the air, crawling across the breaking ceiling, shedding bands of liquefied material down as magma from a volcano. The shuddering noise of close choppers shook the beams of the structure all around, and ropes began descending down from the rooftops, bursting the high sun windows, breaking into a full assault. The piercing noise of rapid gunfire filled the air, amplified by the concrete faces of the walls. Sensing the full collapse into chaos, Dan and his crew, having collected the known hostages, charged forward beneath rolling black smoke. Figures displaying bizarre contortions of bent limbs and blackened eyes, resembling human beings, shed themselves against the hail of whizzing bullets, some of them running head-on into officers in a frenzy, gnawing on their armor before being torn away by blasts. By the sheer density of resistance, Dan and company had to break into a huddle underneath a series of fallen steel tables and debris. The exit was being blocked by a seemingly endless onslaught of crazed devotees. Suddenly, all across the Fellowship's complex, the wreck, the main campus, including the lodging facilities, over the church's extensive installation of loudspeakers and media, which had been used for announcements, as well as the nightly readings by Pastor Lee, began to bell out the song Judas by Lady Gaga, in spite of the wreckage beneath, giving a kind of jarringly contrasting anthem to the whole horrific scene. Throughout what was pretty much a skeleton of raging flames that was once the wreck, a gust of wind hurled and tumbled down the great hall, sending loose objects and even some ghastly insurgents twirling midair. Dan and his entourage looked ahead to find creatures being thrown in every direction, up onto the walls, and over the sprawling floor in torrents of pure, unbridled fire. The terrible swell of flames was increasingly being fed by air from the outside of the compromised building, and quickly swirled into a searing inferno. But the sudden breach also allowed for numbers of officers and soldiers, including Dan and his entourage, to make a run for it and head out of the building. As they galloped forward, Lynch shot a glance back from inside the ventilation mask he'd been secured with, up at the mountainous fire, and he saw within it for a split second a figure dancing with jubilant music. It was Jin, whirling in a total elation amongst the conflagration, even grabbing the passing zombie or two in a dance before hurling them away into pure ashes. A perimeter secured by a coalition of National Guard and heavy-duty police squads waited to capture all those pouring from within the overflowing chaos inside. Chapter 22. Trevin and Jesse, led by Troy, ran down a cinder block underbelly which had taken nearly every part of the Fellowship Tabernacle's decadent estate and installed meticulously over the years for logistical efficiency for its many operations, both covert and not. The group hurried past one caged light bulb after the next, all while the electricity became more and more sporadic, driving the musty concrete passageways intermittently into total darkness. Turning a corner, they all fell upon someone lying against one of the damp walls. Down the way, a new long passage. Hey, who the fuck is that? Troy girded himself, resting his hand across the shotgun he'd hauled from the control room. The guys staggered into a halt. Drawing closer to the person, they came to recognize him as Jeff. He was propped up against the concrete, his arm running with blood, and he was shivering and weeping, reaching out with a single hand. "Jeffrey?" Troy exclaimed. "Jeffrey, talk to me, bud. Gonna need you to say something real fucking quick, like, make it make sense. Jeff's hair fell across his forehead, soaked, and his face was covered in sweat as he leaned back, with his chest rapidly moving. It's hard for... He tried forcing words from his stiff cheeks. How the fuck do we know if he's even real or not, or some fucked up junkie zombie? Troy turned to Jesse and Trevin, their faces drooping with concern. I don't fucking know, Troy, Jesse said. Jeff tried speaking again. They said they smile when they see his glory. The fuck is he talking about, Trevin peeped. They said we'll all smile when we see paradise, too. Jeff had a pistol in his hand. He's got a fucking gun, Troy shouted, taking some steps back. Jeff spasmed, flinging his arm and sending his gun sliding across the floor purposely. He shook his head. Please. I didn't listen to them, please. Jeff lifted a trembling hand toward Troy, sobbing, unable to release his swollen cotton mouth from an uncanny grin. Troy's white knuckles eased, and he closed his eyes for a moment. Please, Father, he began to pray, sweating. Troy bent his knee and reached out his hand, releasing it from the trigger of the shotgun. Taking Jeff's hand in a firm clasp, he lifted him up. They all turned after gathering Jeff up to the sound of applause closing in from down the other end of the long tunnel. Well done. A sober, earthly tone was reverberating from the cold concrete and met all their ears. It was Pastor Lee, accompanied by 4 armed men in masks heading their way. From the opposite direction, inside the tunnel, suddenly a shouting swarmed the hall, not a moment after the pastor's appearance. A team of troopers were charging ahead in their direction, too. Freeze! On the floor! They shouted, down the hall toward the group of friends. Get him, now! Pastor Lee ordered his men, throwing one of their shoulders ahead of him before brandishing a pistol from inside his own suit jacket. Troy flung his weapon and ducked down, attempting to take his buddies with him to the floor on seeing the incoming boots. In the flurry of overhead gunfire, one of the pastor's guys dashed ahead and nabbed Jesse by the wrist and began dragging him along. Fuck, no! Trevin shouted. Troy wrestled Trevin to the floor as bullets flew by overhead. A couple of the troopers being hit fell down while the rest clobbered forward until finally reaching the guy's position. Trevin grappled one of them by the armor, wailing, while Troy lifted his hands up, lying across the floor on his belly. Pastor Lee and his men had since taken flight, leaving behind more hails of gunfire. This book I'm reading is Prophet of God by Chris Cooper. For those just coming in, it's available on Amazon and other formats. I wrote it. I think I said 23. 23, chapter 23. Valerie and Lynn sat inside the back of an armored police truck, each holding a fresh bottle of spring water. Positioned all around them were Hummers of military grade and countless personnel of law enforcement agencies spread over the giant sea of asphalt which lay outside the main campus entrance of the Fellowship Tabernacle. Safety orange cones marked the neutralized perimeter of the tabernacle complex, leaving a dismal picture of roasting buildings and pillars of black smoke ahead across the horizon and amidst the tree line. Lynn and Val were taking turns lifting the respirators fixed to their face to take a drink and replacing them. The soot and smoke was so great In the hardy acreage of the fellowship, an artificial dusk was all that retained what sunlight there'd been left from the solar eclipse prior in the day, leaving a sickly yellowish hue to everything. The air was a constant thunder of helicopters, some employed to combat the flames. There were monitored drones, and officials swarmed the entirety of the known property like wasps, engaging belligerent occupants wherever they were found, and making endless arrests where possible, resorting to lethal force when not. News crews by now had stormed the marked-off areas of accessibility, clamoring against lines of camouflaged uniforms, and furious officials taking incessant questions from the frantic press. Dan brought new bottles of water to the shaken pair before being swept away again by one of his colleagues, demanding his immediate attention. The fire's out of control. They're talking about bringing in a payload. The governor's been called. This shit is national by now. Dan wiped his face. Jesus fucking Christ, he lamented, drawing his hands to his side. There aren't any more we can get out of there? Dan, it's too late. Whoever would be in those things is gone by now. The fires have swept up so much, especially in the wreck, the old mall. Department guy reported it's practically an indoor tornado. Weirdest biblical shit he's ever seen. The fires alone are enough to call in FEMA and an SOE. This is just so fucked up. These kids are shaken to hell, lamented Dan. The press is gonna go wild on this one. No one knew it was this big, Dan. There's enough to sink this whole goddamn thing into the depths of hell. Trafficking, weapons charges, enough to stock an army. The scumbags were making cross-continental stunts, calling them religious missions all over the place, and drugs up the wazoo. Make Pablo fucking Escobar blush. Dan nodded. Any word on the pastor? That's a negative. We can't find him. Dan shook his head. His colleague continued. Dan, they're starting to think these tunnels go for miles, okay? God knows what else will be found, or who else will be. And intel has even gathered that these fucks not only had connections overseas in Swiss boxes, but it's been floating that the church was conducting at least some of their operations off the coast of the lake, on some fucking private island. They're calling up the Coast Guard as we speak. This is insane. Prophet of God by Chris Cooper is the book.